Melissa Patterson does absolutely nothing all day. She sits in her corner office, takes 2-hour lunches, and leaves early, while the rest of us handle actual clients and do real work. My coworker Victoria had written in her meticulously detailed 2-page email to Human Resources, documenting dates and times she believed proved my worthlessness. I've watched her for 6 months, and I cannot understand why management tolerates her presence. She's collecting a salary for doing nothing while hardworking employees like myself handle the real business of this company. The email arrived in my inbox at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, accidentally CC'd to me, the CEO, the entire board of directors, and 17 other employees she'd apparently intended to exclude from her character assassination. But why did I smile when I saw the distribution list? And why, after I replied all with, "Let's discuss this in tomorrow's morning meeting," did Victoria spend the rest of the afternoon frantically trying to recall an email that had already been read by everyone who mattered? The recall notification arrived approximately 4 minutes after her original email. By then, 19 people had already opened it, including the 3 board members who sat on the compensation committee, including the CEO who had personally recruited me, including the CFO who could recite from memory exactly how much revenue I'd generated. Victoria's attempt to destroy my reputation had instead created a company-wide audience for my response. The perception that I did nothing had developed over my 3 years at Patterson Marketing, no relation to my name. Just an amusing coincidence. I worked differently than my colleagues. While they spent their days in visible activity, client calls at their desks, meetings that sprawled across conference rooms, emails sent at all hours to demonstrate dedication, I worked quietly, privately, in ways that didn't advertise themselves. My office door was often closed. I took long lunches. I left at 5 p.m. most days when others stayed until 7 or 8. To someone watching from outside, counting visible hours and observable activities, I appeared to contribute nothing. Victoria had been watching for 6 months, apparently keeping detailed notes of my comings and goings, building a case against someone she'd decided was coasting while she struggled. What she'd never thought to investigate was what actually happened behind that closed door. My role at Patterson Marketing was unusual. I wasn't an account manager handling day-to-day client relationships. I wasn't a creative director producing campaigns. I wasn't a strategist developing marketing plans. I was a business development specialist, specifically a closer of major accounts. The company had hired me 3 years earlier for one purpose: landing the contracts that transformed the business. The million-dollar engagements, the enterprise clients. The deals that required months of relationship building, strategic positioning, and negotiation expertise. I delivered beyond anyone's expectations. The numbers told the story Victoria had never bothered to learn. In 3 years, I'd personally closed $47 million in contracts. Current active accounts I'd brought to the company represented 67% of annual revenue. My compensation, the salary Victoria presumably resented, was directly tied to performance metrics I'd exceeded every single quarter. But none of this was visible to someone who measured work by hours at a desk or emails in an inbox. My working methods were deliberately opaque. Client relationships at my level were cultivated through dinners, golf outings, charity events, activities that happened outside the office, often outside business hours. The 2-hour lunches Victoria had documented were typically prospect meetings at restaurants where deals worth millions were discussed over expensive wine. The early departures were often transitions to evening events where I'd connect with decision makers in settings. It's more conducive to relationship building than conference rooms. The closed office door protected conversations with potential clients who'd requested confidentiality while they considered leaving their current agencies. Victoria had seen the external patterns without understanding what they represented. She'd concluded I was lazy because my work didn't look like her work. The email she'd sent was comprehensive in its accusations. Page 1 documented my arrival times, usually around 9:30 a.m., which she found outrageous. My lunch durations frequently 90 minutes or more. My departure times rarely past 5:30 p.m., and my suspicious habit of keeping my office door closed. Page 2 listed specific dates when I'd been absent during what she described as critical client crises, occasions when the rest of the team had worked late while I'd apparently been unavailable. Her conclusion: Melissa Patterson is either criminally lazy or has compromising information on someone in leadership. There is no other explanation for her continued employment at a salary that I suspect exceeds most of ours combined. The accusation of blackmail was a creative touch. My response was brief. Thank you for your detailed observations, Victoria. Let's discuss this comprehensively at tomorrow's 9 a.m. leadership meeting. I'll prepare documentation of my activities for the past 3 years. Nothing defensive, nothing angry. Just an acceptance of her challenge and a promise to bring evidence. The silence from the CC list was telling. Nobody rushed to defend Victoria. Nobody questioned my response. The board members, the CEO, the CFO, they all knew what Victoria apparently didn't. The leadership meeting the next morning was standing room only. Victoria had clearly spent a sleepless night. Her face was pale, her movements jerky with nervous energy. She'd attempted to reach out to me the previous evening 3 calls, to text, but I'd responded to none of them. Let her stew, let her wonder. Let her contemplate exactly how badly she'd miscalculated. CEO Marcus Harrington opened the meeting with uncharacteristic formality. We're here to address the email sent yesterday by Victoria Martinez regarding Melissa Patterson's work performance. Victoria, would you like to present your concerns? Victoria stood slowly. Confidence that had fueled her 2-page accusation had evaporated. I think there may have been some misunderstandings about the context of my email. The email was quite clear. You accused a colleague of doing no real work, suggested she might be blackmailing leadership, and implied her salary was unjustified. Marcus's voice was neutral but firm. Let's address these concerns directly. Melissa, would you like to respond? I'd prepared thoroughly. The presentation I'd created overnight was comprehensive, not because I needed to justify myself to Victoria, but because the situation offered an opportunity to educate everyone about what business development actually involved. Victoria's observations about my schedule are largely accurate, I began. I do arrive around 9:30 most mornings. I do take long lunches. I do leave earlier than many colleagues. She's correct about the external patterns. Victoria looked confused. This wasn't the defense she'd expected. What Victoria didn't observe, and frankly, couldn't observe from her position, is what those hours represent. I clicked to the first slide. In the past 3 years, I've closed 37 major contracts totaling $47.3 million in committed revenue. Here's the breakdown by client, contract value, and timeline. The numbers filled the screen. Contract after contract, client after client, a comprehensive record of exactly what my doing nothing had produced. The second slide showed the revenue analysis. Currently, accounts I personally brought to this company represent 67% of our annual revenue. The 3 largest clients, Meridian Industries, Coastal Finance, and TechCore Systems, were all my closes. Together, they account for $12.4 million annually. I watched Victoria's face as the numbers registered. The 2-hour lunch Victoria documented on March 15th. That was my final pitch meeting with Coastal Finance, which resulted in a $3.2 million 3-year contract signed 2 weeks later. The early departure on April 7th. I left at 4 p.m. to attend a charity gala where I sat next to the CFO of TechCore Systems. That relationship led to our largest single contract, $4.7 million over 5 years. The closed door that concerned her? Client confidentiality? Prospects considering leaving their current agencies don't want their deliberations? Broadcast to an open office. The third slide addressed Victoria's specific accusations. Victoria noted several dates when I was absent during what she called critical client crises. Let me address each one. I walked through the incidents methodically. May 12th. I was in San Francisco closing the Meridian deal while the team handled a minor revision request from an existing client. The Meridian contract was worth $2.1 million. The revision took approximately 2 hours to resolve. June 23rd. I was at an industry conference in Chicago where I made first contact with 3 prospects who later became clients worth combined $1.80 million. August 9th, I was negotiating final terms with TechCore while the office experienced what Victoria describes as a crisis, a creative deadline that was ultimately met without incident. The fourth slide was the one that changed the room's energy. Victoria suggested my salary exceeds most of ours combined and implied this was unjustified. Let me provide context. I clicked to reveal a simple ratio. My total compensation last year was $340,000 salary plus commission. The revenue I generated was $12.4 million. My compensation represents 2.7% of the revenue I directly produced. I let that number sit. By comparison, the industry standard commission for business development at my level is 5 to 8%. I'm compensated below market rate relative to my production. The reason I'm still here, despite receiving offers that would pay significantly more? I paused. Loyalty to a company that trusted me when I was building my reputation. Appreciation for colleagues who've supported my work. My eyes met Victoria's. Most of my colleagues. Anyway, Marcus Harrington took over after my presentation. I want to be clear about something. Melissa's role and compensation were established before I became CEO, but I've reviewed them thoroughly since taking this position. She is, by every metric we track, our highest performing employee in terms of revenue generation. He turned to Victoria. Victoria, you've worked here for 2 years. In that time, what major contracts have you personally closed? Victoria's voice was barely audible. I'm in account management. I don't close new contracts. You're correct. That's not your role. But you accuse someone whose role is closing contracts of not doing real work because her work doesn't look like yours. Marcus shook his head. That's not just a misunderstanding. It's a fundamental failure to understand how this business operates. The board members had questions. Eleanor Whitmore, chair of the Compensation Committee, spoke first. Melissa, I want to apologize on behalf of the board. We've clearly failed to communicate the value of your contributions to the broader team. That's an organizational failure, not yours. I appreciate that. I've preferred to let my results speak rather than advertising my activities. Clearly, that created space for misunderstanding. Misunderstanding is generous, board member David Okonkwo added. This was a formal accusation of fraud, potentially defamatory, distributed to the entire leadership structure. Victoria, what exactly did you expect would happen? Victoria had no good answer, I thought. I thought leadership didn't know. I thought she was getting away with something and nobody had noticed. You thought, David continued, that the CEO, the CFO, the board of directors, and HR had all somehow missed that a senior employee was doing nothing for 3 years while collecting a substantial salary. It seemed like the only explanation. The other explanation, the one you apparently never considered, was that you didn't have complete information. That her work was valuable in ways you couldn't see. That maybe, just maybe, you should have asked questions before sending a 2-page accusation to the entire leadership team. The meeting shifted to discussing consequences. Marcus outlined the situation clearly. Victoria, your email contains serious allegations about a colleague's integrity and implied criminal behavior by leadership. Even if your observations had been accurate, which they weren't, the appropriate channel was a private conversation with HR. It's not a mass email to board members. The CC was an accident. The content wasn't accidental. You deliberately wrote a document designed to damage Melissa's reputation. The distribution was a mistake. The intent was clear. Victoria started crying. Whether from genuine remorse or fear about her career, I couldn't tell. I'm not going to fire you today, Marcus continued. What? But you're being placed on a formal performance improvement plan. You'll complete training on workplace communication and conflict resolution. Any further incidents of this nature will result in immediate termination. And Eleanor added from the board section, you'll apologize to Melissa. In writing, it's the same distribution list that received your original email. The aftermath was more complex than simple vindication. Victoria's written apology arrived 2 days later, clearly drafted with HR's assistance. Carefully worded to acknowledge her errors without admitting anything that might have legal implications. I apologize for my email regarding Melissa Patterson's work performance. My observations were incomplete, my conclusions were wrong, and my method of expressing concerns was inappropriate. I should have sought complete information before making accusations, and I should have used proper channels for any concerns I had. It was adequate, if not exactly heartfelt. The larger impact was on office dynamics. My role, previously understood only by leadership, was now visible to everyone. Colleagues who had apparently shared some of Victoria's assumptions about my workload now understood what my closed door and long lunches actually represented. Some were embarrassed. I caught several apologetic glances in the hallways. Others were curious. I fielded questions about business development that I'd never been asked before. A few were resentful. Victoria wasn't the only one who'd believed I was coasting. And having that belief publicly dismantled was uncomfortable. Victoria and I eventually had a private conversation. It happened about 3 weeks after the meeting, when the immediate drama had subsided and we could speak without an audience. "I need to understand something," she said. "Why didn't you ever explain what you did?" 3 years and I had no idea. "Did you ever ask?" "No, but—" "Exactly, you never asked. You never approached me with curiosity. You spent 6 months watching me, documenting my schedule, building a case, and never once thought to simply ask what I was working on. I assumed. You assumed I was lazy. You assumed leadership was incompetent or corrupt. You assumed the worst possible explanation for what you observed." I paused. "What does that tell you about your approach to colleagues whose work you don't understand?" Victoria didn't have an answer. "I don't hate you," I continued, "but I also don't trust you. You demonstrated that you're willing to try to destroy someone's career based on incomplete information and uncharitable assumptions. That's not something I can forget." The incident became a teaching moment for the company. Marcus commissioned a series of internal communications explaining the different roles and how they contributed to the company's success. Business development, account management, creative, strategy. Each function was described in terms the others could understand. "Melissa's situation revealed something we should have addressed long ago," he explained to the leadership team. "We've allowed silos to develop where people don't understand each other's contributions. That breeds exactly the kind of resentment Victoria expressed. It was a generous framing treating Victoria's attack as a symptom of organizational failure rather than personal malice. I wasn't sure I agreed, but I appreciated the attempt to extract something constructive from the situation. Victoria left the company 8 months later. She'd completed her performance improvement plan, kept her head down, done competent work in her account management role. The incident had marked Hirsch. He'd never recovered the credibility she'd had before. The company culture had shifted in ways that made her uncomfortable. Her resignation letter cited new opportunities and personal growth. The standard euphemisms for this isn't working anymore. I didn't attend her farewell lunch. The email itself became something of a legend in the company. New employees would occasionally hear the story: the coworker who tried to get a top performer fired for not working and accidentally CC'd the entire board on her accusation. The moral was usually framed as a warning about making assumptions, checking distribution lists, and understanding that not all valuable work looks the same. I'd become, somewhat to my discomfort, an example in cautionary tales I hadn't asked to star in. My career continued to develop along the trajectory it had been on before Victoria's intervention. 3 more major contracts. Promotion to Vice President of Business Development. Compensation package that reflected my continued value to the company. The irony was that Victoria's email had probably accelerated my recognition. Before the incident, leadership had known my value but hadn't communicated it broadly. After the incident, everyone knew. Being publicly accused of doing nothing had resulted in my contributions being documented, celebrated, and rewarded more visibly than ever before. I kept a copy of Victoria's original email in my desk drawer, not as a trophy, as a reminder that perception isn't reality, that visible busyness isn't the same as valuable work, that the people who watch the closest sometimes understand the least. Victoria had spent 6 months documenting my schedule, convinced she was exposing a fraud. She'd exposed something, all right. Just not what she intended. She sent a 2-page email to HR accusing me of doing nothing all day. Sits in her office while we handle clients. She accidentally CC'd me, the CEO, and the board. I replied, "Oh, let's discuss in tomorrow's meeting." Then I showed the contracts. $47 million in closed deals. 67% of company revenue. The 2-hour lunches were prospect meetings. The early departures were client events. Closed door, protected confidential negotiations. She'd watched for 6 months and never once asked what I actually did. The email she meant to destroy me with instead became her own public humiliation, a 2-page document proving she couldn't tell the difference between invisible work and no work at all.